This Roman punishment was so bizarre, even emperors feared it, worse than death. Think the Romans were all about togas, marble statues, and eloquent speeches in the Senate? Think again. Because while history books love to paint ancient Rome as the cradle of civilization, they conveniently leave out the part where justice often involved wild animals, public humiliation, and methods of punishment so grotesque, so nightmarishly inventive, that even the most bloodthirsty emperors got squeamish. Today, you're about to uncover a Roman punishment so bizarre, so brain-meltingly cruel, it made gladiator fights look like group therapy and crucifixion feel like a spa weekend. This wasn't just some fringe torture method, this was ancient Rome's most deranged legal loophole. A sentence so twisted, so humiliating, that even the bloodthirstiest emperors flinched at the thought of it. And let's be real, if Caligula, the guy who wanted to make his horse a senator, thought this was going too far, you know you're in nightmare territory. The Roman punishment so unhinged, it makes medieval torture look like amateur hour. Imagine being sewn into a sack, with a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster all alive, all angry, and all coming with you on a one-way trip to the bottom of a river. This wasn't an execution, it was a chaotic, animal-infested death blender designed to erase you from history and dignity at the same time. Strap in, because what you're about to hear isn't just punishment. It's ritualized madness. Let's dive in. So, what the hell is Poena Cullei? Latin for penalty of the sack. It sounds harmless at first, like something your weird uncle might use to discipline his garden tools. But Poena Cullei was Rome's most uniquely sadistic punishment, and it was reserved for one specific crime: parricide, killing your own parent. Now, Roman society had a lot of hang-ups about family. Fathers were treated like living gods. Disrespecting your paterfamilias was basically the ancient equivalent of punching Jesus, so if you dared kill him, oh, the state wasn't just going to execute you. They were going to make sure the entire world remembered exactly how unnatural they thought you were by giving you a send-off that makes medieval executions look like Disneyland parades. Here's how it worked. Step 1. You're convicted of parricide. Step 2. You're stripped of your name, your rights, and your humanity. Rome literally pretends you no longer exist as a person. 3. You're sewn into a giant leather sack, not alone, oh no, but with 4 very specific animals: a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a snake. That's not a zoo, that's your death cell. Then, the whole bag of biological chaos you included gets thrown into a river, alive. Why these animals? Why this method? Why the actual hell? Let's unpack this ancient nightmare fuel. Okay, let's be clear. Ancient Romans didn't just throw in random animals for fun. This wasn't the Roman fear factor. This was deeply symbolic, weirdly spiritual, and entirely designed to mess with your mind and body as much as possible. The dog. Dogs in Roman culture were supposed to be loyal guardians. So throwing one in the sack, that was the state calling you a traitor to your own blood. You killed the one who gave you life. Now the symbol of loyalty is going to chew your face off in a sack. The rooster. The rooster represented vigilance, like, you should have known better. Think of it as the Roman version of shame on you. Also, hope this bird claws your eyes out. The snake. Classic, symbol of treachery, also conveniently venomous and good at constricting things in small spaces. If the dog didn't get you, the snake would. And then there's the monkey. This one is a bit weird. Some scholars think it symbolized mockery, the idea that the killer is being ridiculed by nature itself. Others think Romans just really hated monkeys. Whatever the case, shoving an angry primate into a sack with you while you're panicking, drowning, and getting bitten by a snake, that's comedy and horror at the same time. So imagine it, a sack full of panic, fur, feathers, and fangs violently thrashing around as it's hurled into the river, the animals attacking anything that moves in their final moments, including you. This wasn't just death. It was humiliating, ritualistic erasure. Now here's the real kicker. This punishment evolved over time. Earlier versions of Poena Cullei didn't even have the animal lineup. In the early Republic days, they just beat the accused with rods until they bled, shoved them in a sack, and chucked them into the Tiber. But that wasn't theatrical enough. Enter the imperial era, where everything, including executions, had to be extra. By the time of Emperor Hadrian, they'd added the full animal set. Some sources say there were regional variants, with different animals subbed in depending on availability. No monkey? Use a goat. No rooster? Toss in a cat. Because apparently, creative execution design was a competitive sport. There were even reports that executioners would blindfold the animals or give them mild tranquilizers to make sure the real chaos didn't erupt until the sack hit the water. Let that sink in. There were people in ancient Rome whose full-time job was managing animal sedation schedules for sacks of death. You might assume Roman emperors were all in on this punishment, considering they routinely fed people to lions and set Christians on fire for light shows. But surprisingly, some emperors hated Poena Cullei. Take Emperor Constantine, for example, the same guy who legalized Christianity. He was so disturbed by the idea of Poena Cullei that he outlawed it entirely in 318 CE, replacing it with a much more humane beheading. But here's the twist. A few decades later, emperors brought it back. Because of course they did. Apparently, beheading just didn't send a strong enough message about how much Rome despised patricide. Even Augustus, famously obsessed with order, avoided using Poena Cullei in high-profile cases. Historians think it's because he knew that spectacle has limits, and this was teetering dangerously close to horror movie territory. When you make public executions too horrifying, people don't learn lessons, they just get traumatized. Here's what makes Poena Cullei uniquely Roman. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about sending a message, performing a ritual, and literally scrubbing your memory from society. Remember, parricide wasn't just a crime, it was a violation of the cosmic order. Romans saw the family as sacred. You weren't just killing your dad, you were killing Rome's future, its structure, its gods, given hierarchy. So instead of honoring your death with a proper funeral, a big deal in Rome, you were tossed into a river like organic garbage, with no grave, no name, and no legacy. And to make sure you didn't make it to the afterlife, they made sure your body was unrecognizable by the time it got there. Because if you think being murdered by a snake while a monkey screams in your face isn't enough, remember, your soul just got cancelled too. Let's talk about the victims, because yes, there were real people who actually got Poena Cullei'd. And in true Roman fashion, some of them probably didn't even do it. Take the case of Lucius Hostius, a Roman citizen accused of killing his father during a property dispute. The evidence? Thin. The vibes? Suspicious. But in ancient Rome, being accused of parricide was already enough to ruin your life. Because how do you prove you didn't murder your dad when the only witness is well dead? Lucius went through the full ritual: trial, sentencing, sack, snake, splash. Historical records don't say much about the aftermath, probably because you weren't allowed to speak or write about people who died that way. That was part of the punishment. Historical erasure. If you died via Poena Cullei, you weren't just executed, you were deleted. Other victims weren't so anonymous. At least 2 senators are known to have faced the punishment during Nero's reign. The irony, Nero himself probably should have been in the sack. This is a guy who literally murdered his own mother allegedly by designing a boat that would accidentally collapse underneath her and sink her into the sea. Spoiler, it didn't work, so he just had her stabbed. Yet Nero, the poster child for parricide, never faced Poena Cullei. Why? Easy. He was emperor. The rules didn't apply. It's like a tax code. If you're rich enough, you can always find a loophole. So instead of justice, we got hypocrisy served in a golden goblet. The trials for parricide weren't just legal proceedings, they were full-blown theatrical productions. Prosecutors didn't just present evidence, they recited monologues, invoked the gods, quoted philosophers. Think Shakespeare meets law, order, with a dash of live animal props. Defendants were paraded in front of the public, often chained, barefoot, and wearing crude signs that read things like "Killer of Blood" or "Enemy of Father's Fire." And witnesses? Oh, they didn't just testify, they performed. They wailed, sobbed, threw themselves on the ground because convincing the jury was a matter of drama, not just truth. Meanwhile, in the background, you'd have actual leatherworkers preparing the execution sack, like a terrifying costume department for your final scene. Even the choice of animals became symbolic to the crowd. Oh wow, they used a black rooster this time. Damn, that guy must have been really evil. Roman justice wasn't subtle, it was a spectacle, and everyone was expected to clap or be next. You'd think something this medieval would fade into obscurity, and for a while it did. After Constantine banned it, most regions stuck with more straightforward executions. Heads rolled, necks snapped, problems solved. But weirdly, Poena Cullei wouldn't stay dead. In the Byzantine era, versions of it started popping up again, though usually toned down. Instead of a full animal sack, some criminals were sewn into bags and drowned, sans zoo. Still horrifying, but a little less National Geographic. Fast forward to 16th century Germany, and you'll find actual court records of people being executed in the manner of the ancient Romans, with sacks and animals. Yes, medieval Europe rebooted the sack execution like a franchise. And why? Because cruelty has always been recyclable. One case even describes a sack execution that included a cat, a snake, and a hedgehog, which honestly sounds like a twisted Dr. Seuss story. By the 1700s, legal scholars were still debating whether Poena Cullei should be reinstated as a form of punishment for unforgivable crimes, because apparently some people read about a monkey attacking a murderer in a sack and thought, you know what? This could work. Thankfully, it never became law again. But it got close, too close. Here's the wildest twist of all. It wasn't just the brutality that made emperors fear Poena Cullei, it was what it represented. Because the punishment was a public declaration that someone had violated the cosmic order, that they'd destroyed the very concept of pietas, the Roman virtue of duty to family and gods. And in Roman society, the emperor was supposed to embody that virtue. So if a ruler ever got accused of parricide, even just rumored, it wasn't just a political scandal. It was cosmic blasphemy. It shattered the emperor's divine image. It turned him from a god among men into a sack-bound traitor of blood. That's why Emperor Tiberius allegedly erased all mentions of Poena Cullei from his legal reforms. Not because he thought it was too cruel, this is the same guy who threw people off cliffs for fun, but because he knew that the symbolism of the punishment was more powerful than the act itself. Poena Cullei wasn't just death, it was excommunication from humanity. Even power couldn't protect you from that idea. At this point, you might be thinking, why? Why not just stab the guy, or hang him, or feed him to the lions like every other Roman punishment? Because this was Rome, a society where execution was not about removal, it was about ritual. They weren't content with removing you from the gene pool. They wanted to obliterate your memory, humiliate your legacy, and send a cosmic warning that said, mess with the family, and we will make sure your death is so horrifying that future civilizations will talk about it on YouTube 20 years later. Mission accomplished. Let's zoom out for a second. Because at its core, Poena Cullei wasn't just a punishment, it was a psychological operation. The Romans weren't trying to stop people from killing their parents by making the act illegal. They were trying to scare you out of even thinking about it. This was ancient behavioral engineering, the kind that makes your brain go, nope, not worth it. It's the same reason modern society uses headlines like "Man sentenced to 500 years" or "Executions to be live streamed." Yes, some countries still do that. It's not about justice. It's about fear-based deterrence. And in Rome, Poena Cullei was the fear equivalent of a nuclear warhead. They didn't just want you to fear dying. They wanted you to fear dying wrongly, dying forgotten, dying in a sack with a snake up your pant leg while a monkey throws feces at your final thoughts. Because when you make the punishment worse than death, you weaponize the human imagination. And Rome, they were masters of imagination warfare. Now, you might be feeling all smug right now. Oh, thank Jupiter, I don't live in ancient Rome. We're way more civilized now. Are we? Sure, we don't toss people into rivers with venomous reptiles anymore. But the spirit of Poena Cullei, it's still here. It just looks different. Today, we have solitary confinement, designed not to kill but to erase your identity. Public trials with live streams, designed to humiliate. Life sentences without parole, a modern equivalent of being thrown into a sack and forgotten. Hell, even the internet piles on. Online shaming, cancel culture, digital exile. We still create rituals of societal erasure, just with pixels instead of snakes. The truth is, when we're scared, when society feels threatened, we reach for symbolic violence. We want our punishments to make a statement. We want people to say, "That's so messed up, I'll never do that." Just like the Romans. At its root, Poena Cullei was about control. Control over your body, your death, your memory, even your afterlife. Because Romans believed in legacy, ancestry, name, and Poena Cullei stripped you of all that. No grave, no tombstone, no record. It was the state's way of saying, you were a glitch in the system, and we're patching you out. And it worked. People feared this punishment more than crucifixion, more than lion pits, more than exile. Because it wasn't just violent, it was existential. Imagine being so erased that even your ghost can't find you. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Poena Cullei wasn't a fluke. It wasn't the result of barbaric minds or lack of empathy. It was engineered cruelty, designed by a society that believed order was more important than mercy. Rome didn't go insane. It optimized. It asked, what's the most effective way to protect the sacred bond of family? And its answer was, terrorize anyone who breaks it in the most grotesque way imaginable. It's easy to look back and laugh, to joke about monkeys in sacks and snake surprises. But the real horror? They thought this made sense. And worse, sometimes it worked. Today, Poena Cullei survives in trivia books and obscure law blogs. It's one of those did you know facts people bust out at parties to sound edgy. But it's so much more than a curiosity. It's a window into how far humans will go to protect power, enforce morality, and sculpt fear into ritual. It shows us what happens when justice becomes performance, when symbolism replaces sanity, when punishment becomes theater, and when a society believes that death alone isn't enough unless you make it memorable. So the next time someone tells you ancient Rome was the peak of human civilization, ask them one question. Did your favorite empire throw people into bags full of wild animals just to prove a point? Because the answer is yes, yes, they did. And emperors feared it. Because deep down, even they knew. Once a society invents something like Poena Cullei, nobody is safe. Not even the ones who think they're above the sack.